first of all, for you that know us much at all, would you please give Midge congratulations or condolences, whichever you think fits. Because tomorrow we will have been married 58 years. I wish you could have seen Midge. She's clapping like this. When we came to Portland 13 and a half years ago, it was a new venture for us, like I suppose most of you coming to this church as well. We were a part of the Rock the very first Sunday, and I have to tell you, it's just as exciting for me today as it was then. In fact, one of the differences is that in this 13 and a half years, I've garnered a whole lot of friends. And I don't leave friends easily. And you are my friends. And I hate leaving you. I was glad that John said something about the next chapter of our life and didn't say epilogue. That makes me feel a little better. But another thing that has happened is that Midge and I are getting older. And I guess that's a good thing. But it's been a long time in many ways since I had to stretch to be big enough to ride some of the rides at Kings Island. To be honest, when I was that size, they didn't even have Kings Island. And in fact, nowadays, I see signs that are more apt to say, if you have heart trouble, don't ride this ride. And I identify with the person who said, I thought it would take longer to get this age. And I feel that way sometimes. But nearly 2 years ago, my daughter and son-in-law in St. Louis gave me a T-shirt that said, I was the square root of 5,625 years old. Well, soon it's going to be the square root of 5,929. Put your phones away, you can figure it out later. And Matt very graciously asked me if I would like to preach today. And it was a mixed bag. And I decided I would do it, but part of the problem is that I've heard a lot of old preachers preach. And that scares me because I'm old. And also because I have tremendous respect for Matt and his preaching ability. I have thoroughly enjoyed his preaching. And my colleagues with which I've had the privilege of working are incredible. The leadership team, the other ministers, it's been wonderful. Especially those on staff have tolerated my ineptness with computers. But I want you to know that even at my age, I am somewhat immersed in the computer age. This is a true story, never been told before, but just last week, I went to one of my common haunts now, a doctor's office, and I was waiting, and I was looking through a magazine, probably a car magazine, and there was an advertisement, and I thought, I don't remember what it was, but I thought I'd like to see more about that. And I didn't physically do it, but in my mind I went, and then I thought, no, people will think I'm totally crazy if I do that. In fact, just yesterday or the day before, Aaron sent me a text to open, and it had the title of this sermon, What Do You Have? .zip. I thought I had a little more than just zip. Zero, zilcho, nada. So on a day like this, what do I say to you, my friends? I could tell you a lot of interesting stories. I've got them. Most of you that know me will find it safe to go back to Walmart again now. You don't have to run down other aisles to dodge me because I'm there and we'll talk your arm off. but I ask God to help me to say something today that would help all of us walk with Christ. And I believe he has done that. So I want us to look at the 6th chapter of John. And I'm sorry, I do not have slides this morning. That's number one that you can check up as being an old man. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked and saw the great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he had already in mind what he was going to do. And Philip answered him and said, "It'd take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each person to have one bite." Another disciple, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. And when they'd all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of barley loaves that were left over. And after the people saw the sign Jesus had performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." And Jesus, knowing that they intended to make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Sometimes when we read the Bible, it's hard for us to really separate ourselves from our own culture and to understand what was going on in Jesus' day. We do, however, live in a day when there is an awful lot of change taking place. Major companies suddenly aren't major companies anymore. In my lifetime, there have been many that have closed. Most of you here today will not remember Montgomery Ward's stores. We're all aware that Sears is no longer a major player. When I was a kid, I wore jeans sometimes to school and they were labeled J.C. Higgins. That was Sears brand name. Kind of like Great Value for Walmart, I guess. We live in a day of an awful lot of change. Who knows what the historians will call our age in years to come. And this time in which the disciples were living, incredible change, just like we have today. The society in which they lived was largely a godless society. People worshiped all kinds of things, rulers and kings. People saw Jesus, those who were looking for him, as the healer prophet. But the other people looked at him as a threat. When Rome took over, they sent their soldiers out to the various places that they were to have people that they had conquered. And in that process, the people who worshiped this particular mountain were taken away from their gods. And so it was a godless society. If you're 12 years of age and older, you may know more about health and healing than most of the doctors did in Jesus' day. The crowd followed because of the miracle. Let's look at it. Number one, there was a big problem. We all have problems. We have plenty of them, daily. Little ones, medium ones. I don't know how you gauge those. And we know what big problems are. They come in all sizes and shape. They may involve family, other people, laws, in-laws. I didn't say that. Governments, illnesses, just all kinds of things. And we may get adept at blaming someone else, but we can't always do that. Sometimes we're very much aware it was our own fault. Sometimes you come home from work and hope your family doesn't ask, "How was your day?" And sometimes you come home from work and look at your spouse and think, "I don't believe I'm going to ask how her day was." And you don't do that because you're afraid she'll tell you. Men, I just read this a week or so ago. This is good advice, I thought. If you come home and your wife is eating ice cream from the carton, don't ask how her day was. And sometimes we make insignificant things bigger. Don't they say the way to make a mountain out of a molehill is just to add more dirt? And sometimes they aren't even our problems. This was a teachable moment as Jesus saw it, and he kind of pulls Philip into this particular problem because he says, if you notice, "Where shall we buy bread?" I'm kind of thinking if that had been me, I might have said, "I'm not in charge of meals." And that's kind of how you feel when somebody else tries to drag you into their problem. But Philip, I guess, hadn't thought too much about the problem until Jesus pulled him into it. And in fact, he thought of something else. The cost to feed these people. He couldn't say McDonald's is open late today. He's not worrying about where. He's worrying about how much. He has calculated quickly in his mind that even if across the street from where they were meeting there was McDonald's, KFC, Red Lobster, and Lone Star, they still could not buy enough to feed these people. Forget the fact that he didn't know where. This is a bigger problem. Healing of hunger. Philip thought about it. And in fact, I think I read to you that it was over half a year's wages, actually closer to 2/3. I figured it up. It's about 64%. Most of us know what it's like to have a problem. Number two, we have inadequate resources on our own. I've heard people speak who were trying to raise money, and they'd say they could do so much more with money, and tried to interest me in their cause. And many of them, there were good causes, and I've given to many of them. I think of missionaries and mission projects and the ones we've done here at church, of which I've been so proud. I couldn't be a part of them, but I've been so proud of the people that have gone to help those that have been in floods and windstorms and things like that. Victims of natural disasters, floods and winds and fire. Illnesses that need to be researched more to find a cure. And the list goes on. We can help, but we don't have the personal resources that can make much of a difference. I don't have that kind of money. But most of the weeks I think, I wish I could look at the bulletin next Sunday and see where we are in the budget and just write out a check, come in sometime during the middle of the week, stick it in the giving kiosk, and get back out. But I don't have that kind of resources. I can't do that. In fact, most of my life, I've never had enough money to just go buy some of the bigger things that I would like to have had. I disciplined myself this week. I looked at one of the garage sales. You may not even know what they are. Rusty probably does. A bar stool racer. he grinned. I don't know if anybody else even grinned, but you look that up and you'll see why a kid my age would be interested in one of those. I've always enjoyed getting those bigger things and often had to plan and budget to make it happen. In fact, one year, I know this is tough on you, but everybody didn't used to have a microwave. And many people were getting microwaves, and we didn't have one. It's when we lived in Anderson. And I wanted for Midge to have one of those so bad. Partly selfish, I'm sure, but I found out that J.C. Penney's, another store that's about to bite the dust, I found that they had them and they were going to be on sale. And I talked to a salesman, and he said, yes, and it's going to be at that price tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock or whatever it was. And I remember the process I went through to deliver Midge someplace we were actually both supposed to be. And I went back, and the guy rang it all up and everything else, or had it ready to ring up so that he could hit 7 o'clock and punch that in to make sure I got one. And I did it. And Linda was always very meticulous. And in her bedroom was a walk-in closet that followed the line of the roof. And so back in the back of that closet, I hid that microwave. And Christmas morning came, and that house happened to have 2 stairs. And I got up and went out to the kitchen like I was getting a cup of coffee and went upstairs, got that out of Linda's closet, brought it downstairs, set it at the other end of the living room. And she was helping kids put batteries and stuff or whatever. And I said, well, what do you know? Santa must have been here. And she calls me Johnny, and she said, oh, Johnny. And I teared up about like I am right now. I thought I could get over that sometime. But I remember she was so shocked that I'd gotten it. And I felt the tears coming. And I grabbed the coffee mug, stepped over the coffee table to go to the kitchen to get more coffee. And I think it was Linda who said, Dad's crying. I was so glad to give that to her, so proud of it. I knew it was something that she would like. But that took some work on my part and some planning. I saw a sports car the other day, and I like cars, but I saw a sports car the other day, and I went home and looked it up. You can buy one brand new for the mere price of something over $160,000. No, I'm not getting one. At some point in our lives, we know that we are inadequate in our resources, physically and materially. Philip's response is 200 denarii would not be enough to buy food so that everyone could have even a bite. A denarius was a part that was the pay for a day laborer, and he was usually paid at the end of the day, so he'd get 6 of those for a week. They had 312 working days because they worked 6 days a week. 64%. Can you imagine that? And then kind of put in here parenthetically is verse 4. There's the obvious pointing to Exodus, when God supplied the starving people who had been in captivity for so long, and he got them out of Egypt and through the Red Sea, but they didn't have anything to eat, and he sent the manna. And now, they had only gotten out because they had taken the blood of the Passover lamb and put it on the doorpost and the lintel overhead. And when the death angel came by, it would see the blood and it would not take the life of the firstborn. And here Jesus is trying to remind them that what is happening soon, as he announces it, is that he is the Passover lamb. Well, Jesus feels the burden of feeding them more than anyone else. And 3, we have Jesus. This crowd wasn't invited to this, but because of Jesus and what he had been doing, here they are. They followed, and just like sheep who aren't good at caring for themselves or fighting for themselves, they followed their leader. And now suddenly, it's mealtime. Can you remember the 23rd Psalm? The second verse when it says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." The shepherd leader has taken them to a good place where they can eat and have their fill and lay down in safety. Jesus is the shepherd leader, the provider, protector. And we know that sometimes our common responses won't work. In fact, sometimes we think we don't have enough time to even sit down. I know that feeling. I was thinking of some of the other disciples. It was Andrew, not Peter, but Andrew apparently wasn't like Peter. You remember how he said, "Lord, if that's you, have me come to you by walking on the water." I think he might have said, "Lord, if that's you, make me a sandwich." But it wasn't him. And there's quite a contrast. It's a small boy with 5 small loaves, think rolls, and 2 small fish. Did you notice that emphasis? It contrasts so sharply with the huge need that is there. Now, we're not anywhere near 5,000 here, but 5 small rolls and 2 small fish probably wouldn't even give each of us a bite. Portland's estimated population in 2016, unless Randy corrects me, was 2016. I don't know if that counted golf carts or not, but I doubt that it would take 1,061 people to run this down by itself. You know, police, fire, some other important jobs, some factories that wouldn't shut down for whatever reason. And the scripture says just men. It was just the men that were counted. Perhaps those that had small businesses would close up and follow Jesus. The managers of McDonald's and El Caminos and Greeks. And there wouldn't be enough for everyone. If a little less than the number of our community were told to sit down, can you imagine what that would be like? If you have ever had a small boy, you know what it is like to say, "Sit down." I once was a small boy. My parents had never heard of time out. But my sister and I both had to sit down for a while sometimes. It was, in fact, our day's time out. And I don't think there's an Aramaic word for hangry. The controlling factor is that they have already seen Jesus performing miracles and healing, and so they have followed him because they still have needs. And here, just as the manna was fed in the desert, Jesus provides for the 5,000. They did sit down because they thought he was going to do some more miracles, and sure enough, he did. They didn't live in a time of fast food. They didn't even live in a time of slow fast food. They didn't turn the stove on with a knob. They lit a fire. My wife told me, tried to remind me a week or so ago, she said, "You're not much of a camper." And I said, "I am too. I enjoy camping. As long as the air conditioner works in the RV, I'm a good camper." But the incredible thing is we have a solution that the world does not understand. We have Jesus. Do you know what Jesus did first here? He gave thanks. I read someplace recently that there was a kind of a challenge. When you wake up in the morning, write down, I would say, 3 things that you're thankful for. And do that every day. And see how much your life changes. And I think that could work for most of us. I'm still convinced that thankful people are happy people. You'd argue a long time to get me off that. And I've also known that unhappy people very often aren't really happy. My best friend in the ministry died last October. I always remembered their ages because Mike was 15 years younger than me, and Dale, his wife, was 20 years younger than Midge. Midge and I had both planned for him to hold our funerals. I particularly wanted him to do it because I thought he'd say nice things about me. You're not much better than my sister. I told her that, and she thought that was hysterically funny. I was serious. And his wife had some things to say. Dale came up to the microphone. Here it was. I thought he'd have my funeral, and instead I was taking part in his. She talked about how rough it had been during his decline in health. He could not work, and her job wasn't all that good, and it just took him scraping at everything to try to get by. And she said one time the church had given him some money on a gift card, and she had budgeted it out very, very carefully. She went to the grocery, got only the things they absolutely had to have, and was leaving the grocery and came by a huge display of Life cereal, her favorite. They didn't have any at home. And she looked at it and thought, boy, that'd be good, but no, that's not in this budget, and I can't get any. And she walked by that and kept telling herself no, and she said, the Lord said to her, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. Can't I get you a $4 box of Life cereal if I want to? But she was a little stubborn and hung on to her thoughts and went on to her car. And she told us that when they were at their lowest, and when she had figured out everything just about to the penny, and she had saved enough on that card to put some more gas in their car, which they would need, she would be talking it over with Mike, and he would say, but Dale, you haven't figured God in yet. And some of you know what that's like. Some of you, I hope you have to know that sometime. And they made it. Every time. God was faithful. If you have received Jesus Christ as your Savior, and He lives in you, I know you have problems, because I have problems. I'm moving this week. That's a problem. I know your resources seem small, especially as you want to do some things that you aren't quite able to do. But you do have Jesus. I got to tell you, I don't like surgeries. I've had a few. But I've noticed every time that I was the most frightened of surgery that I would say a little prayer. Lord, I'm in your hands. I don't know what's going to happen in all this surgery, but it's me and you. And I turn this all over to you because I have Jesus. You probably don't like being sick. None of us do. But you have Jesus. You may not like the situation you're in, but you have Jesus. And it may be that there are people that are just causing your life misery, but you have Jesus. And in fact, that's a great time to share him with those who need him. Maybe Jesus is saying to you, sit down. Lunch is ready. Because you've got Jesus. Band's coming back out, and we're going to sing a closing song together. I'd like for you to just write down on your sheet there, on your bulletin, 3 things that you're thankful for as the band's coming. If your spouse isn't one of them, try to make it so that he or she can't see it. And on down, ask for resources to forgive them of whatever you think they've done. But sit down. Lunch is ready. You have Jesus.